everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, a.k.a. Today, I'm joined by another very special guest, Leila, also known as Emissary of Night, for people who follow them on Bluesky and Twitter. They're someone whose writings I have really appreciated, and being on Bluesky, essentially being away from Twitter, so now on Bluesky, they're one of the coolest people I have found on that platform. So I figured it'd be great to have them on, get to know them a little better, and yeah, just talk to them. Before we get into it, though, I'd like to remind everybody that this podcast is a part of the From the Periphery Media Collective. If you like the work I do, if you like the work we do, please consider supporting us by becoming a member of our Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you get access to exclusive content. You get an invitation to our monthly hangout, which actually just happened earlier today, and it was a very cool bunch of nerds and lefties. And yeah, I'll have the Patreon in the description below, and we'd really appreciate your support. So, with that done with, hello, Leila.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Hello. My pleasure. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Leila, also known as Emissary of Night on all relevant platforms, Twitter, Blue Sky, and so on. I am a Palestinian American. I spend most of my time in the United States, on the rare occasion also in Jordan, and I've had the pleasure and displeasure of writing over the last roughly 3.5 years about Palestine, about US public opinion on the issue, how things have evolved since 2021, and anything adjacent to that. And so that is what I've spent almost all of my time since university on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a displeasure, but it feels like a duty
Yes.
to talk about our people, to talk about home. I don't I don't like having too many directed questions, and so this conversation is going to be very fluid. But I think if there's actually one specific question, it's Emissary of Night. Where does that come from? What is that? Is that a reference to something? I don't know if you have anything, or if it's just like a cool phrase.
I think it started as a bit of a joke for me when I was dabbling in gender stuff, and then the name Layla and Knight. So I thought, why not do that? And so it just sort of stuck around, I think. And so emissary of myself or diplomat of myself or whatever, just a bit of a joke for myself. I find it amusing.
It has a kind of flair to it that I appreciate.
Yeah, I like little things like that. I think it makes it a little more tolerable and fun to be on the internet.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a sort of double-edged sword to be so public facing and to just be me. And so I feel like I've missed the boat, but I could always make a new account where it's like a bit more anonymous. But regardless, the very first question that I usually like to ask the guests that I have on this podcast is a pretty big one. How are you doing?
Well, so when people typically ask, I say best given the circumstances, and I think that's what I would say here. Although I think, given this is a place where I think we could be a bit more honest, it's been quite a horrific 600, and I think we're close to 10 days, give or take. I don't remember the exact, and I don't like to keep track, but it's somewhere around there. As you know, and as we've seen our homelands ravaged by the Zionist regime, by the Israeli army, by American bombs. Uh, we've seen much of our way of life in southern Lebanon and in Gaza and in the West Bank upended entirely. For us who are not at home, but are in the Western world, in the United States or in Europe, it's been on top of this also a challenge to have a landscape of political and media ecosystems where even acknowledging this stuff or even talking about it is a nearly insurmountable challenge. And so it's not like how it is if you're if you're in Jordan or if you're in Lebanon or if you're in one of these countries where you can more or less freely say it, what you feel up to a point if you're in one of the more despotic regimes, of course. Here, it's an uphill battle to even have it acknowledged. And so that's the icing on the cake, or the opposite of whatever that would be. It's not been good for your mental health, or for my
No.
mental health. So not great, I will say.
No, yeah, that's the experience of watching this, but also of just how politicized our bodies and our minds
Yes,
and our hearts have become. And it's one of those very rare things where it's like you're not allowed to grieve. Even if you
no,
grieve, you're seen as complicit in a weird way. Like it's one of those only circumstances being in the West and being Arab, specifically being like Shami, being Lebanese or Palestinian, more so for Palestinians, that yeah, it's just so twisted and it's been very difficult. And
I think something that's been sort of making me extremely upset over the last couple of days is, you may have seen it, you may have not. The Washington Post, which is owned by the billionaire Jeff Bezos, it ran a story. I think where initially in the headline, or in the story itself, said pretty unequivocally that the occupation army had shot dozens of Palestinians as they were attempting to get food parcels from the so-called humanitarian fund, the Israeli-backed humanitarian fund. And then hours later, they retracted their headline in the story. They made this big Twitter post where they apologized for
mhm.
not including that the Israelis denied having done something, as if this has any equal weight whatsoever, as this has any bearing on a factual reality. That left me angry for the rest of the day, and still angry right now. I think it's the fact that we're 600 something days in, and there are actually media outlets apologizing, not just running sanitized accounts, or even omitting facts, but also bending over backwards and apologizing for not balancing the story, is mind blowing.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. And so it's like being even half aware is to be, constantly infuriated and
Yes,
enraged. I remember in 2021, the a building in Gaza,
the AP.
like the AP building was bombed and destroyed. And
Yes,
they then released a statement as well, like being like doing that kind of balance and whatever, and not able to say that Israel bombed our building. It's
yes,
there is this, and it's so frustrating because there's a very specific example which to me is not comparable, but there is a double standard with how Europeans approach the Russian aggression on Ukraine and the Russian invasion. And even
yes,
today, when I was like at the laundromat, there are just as part of like stickers or things you can get for like cultural events, there's one that's like help Ukraine. And it's like that's good. Or like now if I want to order food, there's an option on the website, hey, give 10% of how much you're spending on food to help Ukrainian refugees. And it's like good. But
this one, yes.
but there's absolutely none of that empathy. It's the opposite. And it is just so frustrating and so difficult. And again, yeah, we are 610 days into this, so it's like compounded.
Yes. It's not a new phenomenon whatsoever. It's not like, even even if you were to give the benefit of the doubt, which I am not
Mm,
inclined to do, it's not like it's October 10th or 12th or 13th of 2023. We're in the year 2025. And it's also, of course, obviously, Gaza is the center of it all, and the genocide is the center of it all. But it's also not just Gaza. It's southern Lebanon, it's
mhm.
southern Syria in the Golan, it's Yemen. These are all places which have also been ravaged, all of which simply because they're not compliant. And in the case of Syria, they're even arguably compliant, or they're not actively aggressing or
Yeah.
de-escalating the situation. And yet still, southern Syria occupied, southern
It's
Lebanon
it's the case
occupied,
with
Beirut
Lebanon now
bombed.
as well. Yeah. Beirut
Yes,
bombed at the time at
yes,
like when the official Lebanese government and the president and whatever, the whole thing is,
Yes.
okay, we will comply, we will disarm
US
Hezbollah and
aligned,
whatever.
just
Yeah, but it's
disarm Hezbollah,
still,
disarm the camps, even the Palestinian camps,
oof,
which are
that's
being
something
disarmed
that
now.
I'm really scared about, actually. Um,
Yes.
there is just so much happening in our region, and it's terrifying, but it's also this kind of, to me, a return to form of the assumed logic of imperialism and the righteousness of imperialism. And it's terrifying. I don't know. But I find in a lot of your writings on Blue Sky a kind of a clarity, which I really appreciate, which I don't have anymore. But I'm wondering how you approach some of these things in the ways that you like discuss them online. Like you have a very good grasp of the history, the way that you talk about, for instance, Yitzhak Rabin or whatever, or, some of these more
Yes.
slightly historical figures.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I'm wondering your approach to sort of talking about these things online and how that's been for you.
I think I just had the opportunity because yesterday I was discussing with, I don't know if you know who Dylan Saba is, but he's a Jewish Palestinian lawyer in New York. I was just going through some of his old writing, and I found something from when he was in college where he was like, since I was 10 years old, my father has been pestering me about my opinions on the Middle East or whatever. It's like, like this is a common thing. Your parents will demand that you have an opinion on something when you're barely a middle schooler or whatnot. And they're like, what's your opinion on the political economy under Mubarak? Huh? Tell me now. And it's like, okay, I don't know. But you're forced from an early age, if you're Arab or if you're someone who's in a very political tradition, you're forced to articulate early. And doubly so if you're in the US, where, you know, the war on terror mindset is still very much alive and it's fused with that Red Scare mentality or whatnot. And so with Blue Sky, it's interesting because this is a very hyper liberal or ultra liberal space, not quite left wing. It's not in that sort of barometer, but it's all sorts of like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris fans, or Democratic Party ultra partisan, etc. And there are little pockets of like British people here, Brazilians here, but who you're talking to mostly is white or black liberals, and so they don't approach our region with you know a framework or a system. Because what we have in the United States is Israel is surrounded by these regimes which wants to kill it, and therefore everything it does is in self-defense. And there's very little beyond that. There's no grappling with what Arab nationalism was, what
Mm,
is now. There's no grappling with what the genesis of the Palestinian people as a group is, or what nationalism even is. Certainly nothing about the Nakba, certainly nothing about the Nuska, certainly nothing about um, the first and second and third invasions of Lebanon. None of that. So you sort of have to guide people step by step. And so if someone says, oh, well, Oslo was the best opportunity for peace and it got ruined, you sort of have to retrace what's already been said by Edward Said or by Darwish or by any of the critics of the Oslo Accords. And you have to say, well, Rabin never actually endorsed the idea of two states, or he helped suppress the first intifada, or so on and so forth. I don't know. I think for people who, and also in addition to them being very liberal on Blue Sky, they're also very high engagement. Like to their credit, these are people who do read
mm,
and actually try to engage for the most part, if they're assuming something in good faith, of course. So it's not like the lowest of the barrel of like a Twitter or a Reddit thread most of the time. It's
yeah.
sometimes it is though. So if you send someone, well, here's what Rabin actually said, or here's what Sharon actually did, or so on. At the most of the time, at the very least, they'll be like, I didn't know that.
Mm.
That makes it a bit more complicated. Um,
There is a sense, yeah, there is a sense on Blue Sky that these are the people. Like again, I spent many years on Twitter, and Twitter definitely had this culture of people more aligned to sort of tendencies or ideas or whatever. And so it's like harder to reach them as people. And so my approach was always, if I were to respond, it's not so much to try to convince this person, but for anyone else who's going to be like seeing this thread.
Yes, yes, that's a big part of it too.
Yeah,
Playing to the
but
audience. Yes.
yeah. But with Blue Sky, with some of these things, I mean, so where I've been at these days in relation to Gaza, it's been very difficult at just like an emotional, personal level. And I'm reminded of something that I remember Chomsky saying once about the Holocaust, that
Mm.
that he refuses. I mean, this is also kind of interesting because he's someone who kind of like fiercely defended, in this kind of like free speech principle, this person
Sure.
who was being persecuted for publishing whatever. But for him, he said something that I found quite profound, which is that he refuses to debate or even to engage in discussions about the Holocaust only because it's like to enter into the arena, to enter into the point of like that it's a matter of discussion is to like lose one's humanity.
Yes.
And so I kind of find myself in that place emotionally when it comes to Gaza that I can't even begin to try to discuss with people using facts with sources or with arguments. Because again, at this point, and it's been so crystal clear and that this is a genocide, that like it's not something and then there's this excess, It
Yes.
is intentional genocide of 2 million people. And again, now you even have the Israelis saying it. And you have now even yes, even the Washington Post sometimes or the Guardian or all of them are
Yes. It's
now
unequivocal. It's very clear.
so I can't even, there was a point in my life maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and this was something that I'd really learned from Edward Said. Again, reading this essay that he wrote in 1979, Zionism from the
Yes.
standpoint of its victims, where it's like it's a kind of a haunting read, honestly, because in many cases we're still having the same arguments,
Yes.
but he lays out so distinctly and so concretely the arguments. And so there is that kind of intellectual duty,
Mm.
especially within the Western mind. And this is specifically of what Edward Said's kind of task was, because he really believed, and I think this is quite true, that a large part of the struggle against Zionism is in the Western mind and is in the West, because so much of it is based within. Zionism starts in Europe, and
Yes.
Zionism as a response to anti-Semitism, which is a whatever, is a European, like that European anti-Semitism specifically, but
Yes.
also like borrowing from ideas of settler colonialism and imperialism, et cetera, et cetera. But I just don't have that in me anymore. I'm so exhausted. I'm so tired. And so, like, at this point, I'm doing my stuff. I'm still talking, but I'm not able to engage in the ways that I'm seeing you engage, which again, I find like incredible and like very kind of, I don't know, good. But it's something that I'm clocking in myself that I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. I think part of it is, well, I think in one respect, I think I've become more narrow in how I approach it because I used to argue with anybody. And now I try to suss out very quickly, is this person in the nicest way possible literate? Are they going to read
Yeah.
anything I mention? Is this person seeking to understand a framework or seeking to understand how maybe other people concretely understand it in their own mind? If not, then it's done. We're done. But also, there are people I think like I realize you mentioned the essay, and I actually cited Standpoint a couple of days ago. I think it was in relation to what you're seeing with the ATL right now.
Mm.
Mr. Jonathan Greenblatt, who is the CEO, and he's in recent days had a bunch of the ADL is very leak centric now. Anything he says gets leaked no matter where it is. And he said, I guess, at a meeting recently with like Republican lawyers that BLM, Occupy, and pro-Palestinian protesters are all the same sort of nihilist or whatever. And I thought that was great because it's exactly what I've been saying. I think that it is true. They are all a part of the same. bloc. Obviously, we're not nihilists. We're the people who want the world to remain the world, or to make the world better anyway. But it was great for me because I think, you know, yes, exactly. People who think Black Americans or anyone who's non-white have equality are the same people who look at what happens in the Middle East and thinks this is awful. But a couple of years ago, he said in another meeting that had his statements leaked that he understands why Palestinians oppose Zionism, that he gets why. He actually said that. He said something along the lines of, "I can understand why someone whose family was uprooted and emptied out of Palestine in 1948 would hate Israel."
Hmm.
Great. Of course, immediately afterwards, he said something along the lines of, "But I don't care insofar as my job is to protect Israel."
Yeah.
Um, but that's great because, or at least it's great that it's on the record that he said this, because then if there's someone who's like, well, why is there so much focus on Israel? Why is there so much focus on this U.S. backed genocide, which it is a genocide? Well, I mean, because why do you think if your family was emptied out or if your home was emptied out? But it's a hypothetical that'll never happen to them, and so they can sweep it, dismiss it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I do have days where I think maybe it's less useful than others, but I don't know.
No, you wrote something. Yeah, I saw that thread, and I think just earlier today you wrote something about the obsession
Yes,
that, like,
it's elite driven. It's not. This is a thing I try to say, even to people who are on our side, so to speak. You know, people who agree with the central premises that this must be stopped, that this is genocide, etc. Because sometimes we will buy into. Sometimes people who are aligned with our goal of stopping this aggression will buy into that we're the only ones who care or something of that sort. And that's true to an extent. We're the only ones who care about Palestine. We're the ones who care about the lives of Arabs or the lives of Middle Easterners. That's definitely true. But when someone asks Zohran Mamdani, for example, about Israel when he's running for the mayoralty of a city in the
yeah,
United States, they're doing that because it's the only country that the US media ecosystem demands people express support, not just for the existence of, but for their particular legal, political, and socioeconomic supremacist framework, the
yeah.
way they govern their minorities, which is absurd. It'd be like if it'd be like if an Austrian candidate was asked, "Do you support America as a white supremacist state or something, or like
Yeah.
anybody from anywhere?"
It is. I saw that clip, and it is something that is so uniquely American and frustrating that, I mean, on top of the fact that this is 600 days into a genocide, but just what is that question? What is that question in a debate for the mayor of New York City? Where is the first
Yes,
country you will go to? They all unequivocally say Israel, Israel, Israel.
yes.
And then the one candidate who says, I'm in New York, I'm running for the mayor of New York, I'm going to meet people, I'm not
I
going
will stay
anywhere.
here.
I will stay here. And yeah, there is this deep obsession. And so, okay, I find this very funny, and I kind of want to, like,
Sure.
throw this out there, which is a bit, because I've never expressed this, even though I feel like I've talked around it. So, like,
Sure.
in my first video essay, titled after the video, after Edward Said's essay, Zionism from the Standpoint of Its Victims, I show several clips. I basically show the whole monologue of Mahmoud Darwish in the film Notre Musique. And one thing he says at the end, which is, why are we Palestinians so famous? It's because you are our enemies. And in the film, he's being interviewed by an Israeli journalist. Because you are
Yes.
our enemies. The focus is on you. The interest is in the Jewish question, in what is
Yes.
called the Jewish question. And so there is a very interesting parallel, I find, or rather subversion, where that premise I see is subverted and used and co-opted by Zionists discursively with the very, like, quippy phrase "No Jews, no news." So for those listening, I don't know
Yes.
if you've ever heard this, but it's basically like when a Zionist would say something like, "Why aren't you talking about? Why are you only focusing on what on Israel? Why aren't you saying talking about Sudan? Why aren't you talking about the Congo?" Well, because there's no Jews doing it. Or why aren't you talking about Syria, like back in the days of Bashar, of the
Yes.
Assad regime? No Jews, no news. And so it's a very funny thing there because it's the flip side of this logic. And it's less so about the fact that we only care because it's Israel doing it, but rather it's like, why are they so obsessed with us? It's not our obsession. Like, why am I obsessed with it? It's my people, you know, and
Yes.
it's like the Palestinians, and it's just and it's a genocide. These are human beings, but
Yes.
it is the Western obsession. It isn't. It's the media. It's the like. Why is it? Why is that a question? That, you know, will you go to whatever? Why is an American anchor asking a question for someone running as mayor? Do you believe in Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state? Which, as you have also pointed out on Bluesky, was literally a like a negotiating moving of the goalpost that the Israelis
Yes.
did in the 80s after the PLO accepted Israel's like existence. And so it's like, oh, okay, shit, you're gonna accept that? Then, okay, do you accept us as a Jewish state? Which is obviously like you can't accept that because that means that you're just advocating for your own second, like in the best case scenario, to advocate for yourself as a second class citizen in your own country. But so I just find that parallel slash subversion kind of funny between why are the Palestinians famous because Israel is our enemy, and then no Jews, no news, which again I just find like such a ridiculous, frustrating, whiny ass piece of shit rhetoric. I hate it.
It's rather petulant, isn't it? It is rather petulant because I I try not like because now I've somehow managed to capture enough of an audience on Blue Sky. I try not to be too aggressive or too, or at least like, linguistically too aggressive, like
Mm,
make fun of people per se. But it it is rather petulant. This is a country which has achieved an unparalleled level of diplomatic and legal insulation from any
mm,
form of consequence, even martial, even militaristic consequence, with a defensive array that's funded by the U.S. With a qualitative edge over every single one of its neighbors, even every one of them, even Egypt, and and yet they have all this stuff, and yet they still want American citizens, private and public, to express support for the abstract ideas that
mm,
underpin the state. And it, it's an indication of insecurity, I think, but also it's because we're a threat. Our existence is a threat to the narrative that underpins the state's purpose, I think. Because, I think Edward Said has also talked about, and obviously many have talked about how for Arabs, after the establishment of the state of Israel, we've sort of discursively for Germans, for Americans, we've become like the new Nazi in many ways, simply for resisting, for being inconvenient to the
mm,
uh, maintenance of the Israeli state. We did not commit the Holocaust, obviously. Auschwitz was not in Beirut or anything of that sort. It wasn't us who committed the pogroms in Russia, and so on. Obviously, there's been a long history of ups and downs between sectarian groups in the Middle East, but this is a more generic kind of sectarianism than anything that happened in Europe. And yet, because even though we didn't do any of these things, the state of Israel was established on an Arab land, on Palestinian land. And simply saying that this is the case is equivocated or is equal to Hitler, which
mm,
is completely bonkers. And now you see obviously the contradictions at play because Elon Musk literally doing the Nazi salute is a misunderstanding.
yeah.
But a college student saying don't use 2-ton bombs to kill a child is a Hitlerite. Like
Mm,
this is not sustainable. That's why I believe personally that most young people see it as ridiculous because it's not a sustainable rhetoric. It's too outrageous. Most people won't buy that, I don't think,
No, and it's
personally.
it's definitely collapsing at the moment because it is now so idealistic. Like it is beyond the pale. Like what the
Yes, I
Israelis
think
are saying. It used to be the
yeah,
case where it was like this Israeli minister, this like aside from like what they're doing, like actually just looking but it
yes,
was so much of like within the diplomatic channels or it's this Israeli set like a minister. It's all of them now. And like again, you showed this you linked what you described as a softball article on the Telegraph. And the Israelis cannot
yes.
handle themselves. They still just say, oh, the
No,
two-state solution is impossible. We want to annex it all.
yeah, there's no there's no diplomatic capacity anymore for these for these people, mostly because they've gotten everything they've ever wanted for decades. And now they're like having a breakdown in response to like even mild symbolic pushback. Because it's not as if I think this is something that people miss sometimes because I talk to some who are like, well, surely eventually the EU will intervene. Surely eventually Canada will do something, and or Australia or even the Arab states. Where are the Arabs? Maybe
Yeah.
eventually they will do something. And I feel this way to some extent personally, of course, because in my heart I want to believe there's a red line, but there's only a red line if we make it so. These countries will gladly let things continue to happen so long as they're allowed to. That's the thing. Like the UK, they suspended a trade deal negotiation that was already not making any progress, and they sanctioned two or three settlers when there's 750,000.
Yeah.
This is not a any real punitive measure, especially when F-35 fighter jets are made in British factories and then or parts are made for them in British factories and shipped off to Israel. Like these are not punitive measures whatsoever. And yet, all the while, even though these are symbolic, or even though these are minor reprimands, the Israelis will go on to television or in interviews say that Emmanuel Macron is a crusader or Lula is a member of Hamas or so on and
Yeah.
so forth. It's ridiculous. It's kind of funny, but also it's ridiculous.
It would be funny if it wasn't so, yeah, like
Yes,
matched with an actual real atrocities and the like. But I want to ask you, like, because there's something about some of the things that you focus on that remind me of, I hate, okay, I knew I was going to ask this or say this, and I hate it for both you and me,
sure,
but only because you have declared your age, which I think for many people online that see how sophisticated some of your analysis is are a bit surprised. And so
sure.
it does, like, some of the things that you focus on reminds me of me when I was a bit younger. And I hate saying it because it makes it sound so condescending, where it's like, you'll grow up, like, but
Sure.
the opposite. There's a clarity, and a kind of a vision of like writing and historical research and the like as like not as enough, but as in like it's worth focusing on. I don't know if this actually makes any sense. What I guess I'm trying to ask is, do you feel like some of this labor focusing on a kind of like intellectual approach um helps also? Like, is this something that you feel nourishes you? That like you're because it appears to me as a kind of like constant like feeding of your own clarity, again set against this like global genocidal gaslighting.
Sure.
um yeah, how does that make sense?
Does it help me personally?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? I think so. I think given when I was growing up, and I'm obviously still to some degree, I think we all are always. When I was growing up, I was constantly reading Said, and so not just in terms of like how do we resolve our plight, but also something that resonated constantly for me was um, hearing my father talk about a homeland that he hasn't been able to go back to for decades, and then talking to my grandmother who has since passed a couple of years ago, and so on. People who lived in Palestine and lived in Jordan, and then being here in the US, you get a sense of like two existences or being in two places at once.
Mm.
And this is obviously qualitatively different than what Said went through or what our elders went through because they were there physically. But they've given us an inheritance of what we have lost.
Mm.
And so this now coupled with what we're losing today, because we are losing so much, has made it pretty unbearable. Obviously, it's unbearable to see it every day. And I think for me, constantly reading, uh, constantly writing, it's an assistance of sorts. And I think even also with the writing and with speaking to people every day, I think if I can even convince, a writer here, another writer here, uh, an organizer there, that this is an apartheid system, or this is genocide. It's a new escalation on what's been 75, close to 100 years of dispossession. This is related to the U.S. system of imperialism. This is interlocked within it. It's not merely a distinct thing sectioned off or siphoned off. If I can convince people of this, even just a couple, I've had the fortune of being able to convince more than a couple, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, that's nourishing, I think. And now I've gotten it into my head that perhaps I'll go to grad school, so maybe that'll be my method for further curing myself of this obsession, or making it more, maybe justifying it more.
Yeah. If you can find a paid program.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing. I do not want to. I'm not going to pay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah,
Um,
I think it's a little nourishing. I think that's all that to say. I think it does help.
Nourishing, yeah. And it's just, it's also because it's a specific type of approach, and there's definitely a genealogy there. And so, like Edward Said, I'm assuming you've read his autobiography, Out
Yes,
of Place. That was, to me, one of his best writings because
yes,
it clarifies so much of Orientalism, but also of cultural and imperialism. Like
yes. I was
it's
about to
all
say
there.
his best, in my opinion, his best book, Culture and Imperialism.
Oh, really?
Maybe a
Okay.
hot take.
Maybe
Maybe
I mean maybe it's a hot take for me that Out of Place is to me his best, but he also
it's more
has these
intimate. I like the intimacy.
it's more intimate, but also it's I don't know. I think I've been deeply obsessed with the sort of like lived experience, like the kind of the analysis that comes from lived experience, like sort
Sure.
of reading the analysis that comes because it's very clear and he says it. He also
Mm,
has like a lot of interviews and his films. I don't know if you've ever seen some of these like
I have. Yes, I
yeah,
love
yeah.
them.
I love them. I've screened some of them.
Uh,
He has this interview that I've shown several times online, like on film screenings, with this like Dutch presenter, and I love it. And it's sort of when I rewatched it a year ago with people, I completely forgot how foundational it was for me. I'll link it in the description if anyone wants to listen to it. It's quite a unique one because he goes through the gamut of his thought, but also of the history and of himself.
mhm.
But there's a longer history there, or like a wider one. And I see your writings like within that tradition. So, like, have you heard of the PLO Research Center that was in
Yes.
Beirut? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I actually have I have the first publication that they
Oh.
released. Yeah. In Arabic, it's called Zionist Colonialism in Palestine. But I had another one, and these are like booklets. I had one that was the 22nd book they published.
Mm.
And this I found, and this was published in like the 70s. It was about international agreements on Palestine. And it's just such a thorough rundown of all of these, like, of basically all the international codes that basically, within them demonstrate the criminality and the illegality of the occupation of
Yes.
the state of Israel, but also of its occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and everything
Yes.
that's done since, but also of its foundation and the like. And so I really appreciated that. And again, it's the kind of tradition I felt myself a part of, and I've given up a bit of it because I don't know, I'm focusing on other things.
Sure.
But because at the moment I'm constantly questioning the validity or value of details, you know, of like making the case.
Mm.
Um, I'm at the point now in my life, and again, not I'm not that much older than you, but
I was about to
but
say you can't be no.
I'm a bit older. I just
Okay.
remember the first thing you posted when you said something about like you were too young to have watched Lost, and I remember Blue Sky
I
lost
just
it.
finished it. It's good. Oh, they were so mad. They were. I this might have been the most absurd thing that has ever happened to me. I made a joke for those who don't know, and it's gone now because I delete regularly because I just don't like
Yeah.
clutter. I'm a bit of a obsessive and I don't like clutter on my pages, so I delete. But I made a joke about what is his name? The guy who is supposed to be an Iraqi.
Oh yeah,
Um, and
Saeed.
he's Indian. Yeah, and he's Indian, and he's a
Yeah.
great actor. And it was just funny to me that they cast him as an Iraqi, and everyone got upset. Like hundreds of people were like, "Do you know what acting is? Do you know what?" It's like okay, calm down.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand, but no,
Lost
yes,
is talking about Lost as a way to trigger, and that's another thing that I think that was one of the moments that I clocked Blue Sky for what it is because of the reaction of that tweet.
nobody knows what a joke is. Nobody knows what a joke is.
Well, but also it's just if you really want to trigger people, talk about Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? Trigger white
Oh,
people
sure.
specifically.
Yes, yes,
They're
sure.
still not over it. That's the original trauma.
That's
Um,
true.
but yeah, I rewatched Lost a couple of years ago because a friend of mine had never seen it, and those Saeed scenes. It's interesting to me because again, I was around and I was conscious of that kind of like post 9/11 media atmosphere. And so that was
Yeah,
kind of groundbreaking to even have a kind of three-dimensional Arab
yeah.
character.
I'm sure it was,
But
but also now it's so lacking.
yeah, but again,
Yeah.
it's also like we're selling ourselves way too short as Arabs
Yes,
to
exactly.
like
Yeah.
put it because I grew up in Lebanon, right?
Mhm.
But I grew up like first of all in like an English speaking school and
Yes.
also very much so online and like to a point that I basically thought I was white, you know?
Mm.
Like I felt so attached to American culture. I felt so like aspirational, and that's part of the sort of like American cultural imperialism, wherein it presents this very cool, you want to be one of us, you know, you want to be one of the friends
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah.
Friends. For me, it was Seinfeld.
Ah,
What a betrayal that was. Literally, George
uh,
Costanza was my idol growing up, you know?
I heard that this is the show about nothing.
It's more than that, but yeah, you've never
Okay,
seen
yeah,
Seinfeld.
no.
Oh my goodness. Um, so it's people say it's a show about nothing. It's a show about like how a comedian gets his material. So it is about
Sure,
like daily interactions and because his stand-up routines are bullshit and it's just like, you ever notice
that's
this or
fun.
that?
Yeah,
But it's something that never happens on like Arab TV where you have like self-deprecating characters, especially
yeah.
George Costanza. And me growing up incredibly neurotic, I just loved it. I found it so funny. Uh, Again, huge betrayal or feelings of like, fuck that, because now with Jerry Seinfeld being a
Yes, of
genocidal
course,
maniac.
of
Same with
course.
Bob Dylan. I don't know if you know.
I didn't know about this.
Oof. Do you like
What
Bob
happened with
Dylan?
Bob Dylan?
Do you like?
My partner does.
Oh, okay. I grew up
My
loving him. I
partner.
still like his music. I still like the first like six, seven albums are like essential for me.
What has he said? What was he? Or did he used to be, or is it both?
Is it both?
Like, did he used to be? Like, is he like pro Israel today,
I don't know about him
or years
today,
ago?
but in 1973 or after 70th the 73 war, he wrote a
Ah,
song called Neighborhood Bully.
I see, I see.
Which, yeah, you can imagine. But it's
Yes,
like you were saying at the very beginning, this idea of like this state that's surrounded by all these other states that want to kill it or whatever.
yes,
But he is the neighborhood bully, you know?
yeah, of course.
And filled with these Zionist myths of like
Oh,
he built a castle in the desert, and he just wants to live, but it's like his neighbors want to kill him, but he is the
that's
neighborhood
disappointing.
bully. It's super fucking disappointing. And especially again, because this isn't also Leonard Cohen wrote another
Yes.
song after the same thing about like about a war.
Mm.
Leonard Cohen, I was less like a it just he wasn't that big for me. But anyway,
Yeah.
so we've sidetracked a little bit, but there is like a
Mhm.
I mean, there is no sidetracking, but it's just this kind of thing of like, I get the sense from your writings and your presence that you do embody that kind of split, or not split, it's like a kind of peripheral identities. Being in the
Mm,
diaspora, you do, and I have this weird thing where I embody a diasporic experience, but I grew up in the homeland,
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's that it is that difficult thing that you feel like you identify with certain things and things make sense for you, but then you discover how you're actually super peripheral to it, and they wouldn't
Yes.
have you. And so you're watching something like Seinfeld or watching Friends or watching these things, or then just engaging on Blue Sky, or yeah, like we were talking at the big, like before we started about some of these other bigger YouTube philosophers, thinkers, intellectuals, and you get this, you find yourself kind of betrayed because they won't have you.
Yes. I think for two things from me on this. I think first, I was telling I had the opportunity to talk to a U.S. liberal outlet podcast a couple of weeks ago. They're also on Blue Sky, Liberal Currents. I think they'll have their thing soon. They don't really talk about Palestine very much or anything, but they have a lot of people who are within their staff, like sympathetic, I would say. And I had the opportunity to talk to them, and when I was talking to them, I was reminded, as a kid, I actually went to an elementary school named after one of the people who died on 9/11, and that the school was named after him because he was from the same area of Texas or whatnot. And so I went there, and I remember distinctly, I had to be in fourth grade or fifth grade. I think I was 10. Bin Laden was assassinated, or killed by the U.S. Army. And I went to school the next day, and I think it had to be my science teacher who asked, was like, "Is your family sad about Bin Laden's death?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? What are you? Who are you? Who are you to ask me that?"
Jesus.
First of all, what? Second of all, I was watching wrestling or something the night before. I don't give a
Yeah.
shit. I don't know. And that was for me. That was like, oh, so this guy thinks I'm a jihadist, and I'm from some boot camp out in the mountains, and I'm here to do whatever. I don't know. That was the first moment that I was like, okay, I see what is up. I'm not quite American to this person, or I'm not quite whatever he is. And then on the flip side, also, like you mentioned, these queer YouTubers, especially coming into my full identity, coming into my full age of being an adult, being gay, being trans, and all these things. Watching Natalie Wynn, Abigail Thorne, these people who are quite talented. They're undeniably talented. They do interesting analysis. They do good work, but they are white. They are American or British, and they know what is taboo in American and British media for the most part. And so they don't talk about Palestine, and they don't talk about Lebanon and all of these things. And that hurts, obviously, quite a lot. Because these are people who are willing to say explicitly fascism is bad. They're willing to say what was done to Native Americans was bad, or what was done to the Indians was bad. And how can you say that what was done to the Cherokee was awful and horrific and condemnable, or what was done to the Irish, or what was done to the Indians, and then turn and see much of the same. I won't say one to one in each experience, but much of the same. All of this is a pattern, a system. Settler colonialism is and imperialism is, and so things get replicated and not say anything.
Hmm.
Like that's a domino. And I know for a fact these are people who also talk about Ukraine, and rightfully so, talking about Ukraine. Or to bring up Blue Sky again, what you'll see often, and we actually talked. I saw you arguing with someone, probably because of there are some stupid people who follow and think that either me or all Arabs or something of the sort, that everybody was a fan of Assad,
Yeah.
right? I remember you were telling somebody like, tankies are dumb, and being pro Assad is not like being a white pro Assad is not. It doesn't make much sense even. But you see a lot of people on Blue Sky who are liberal who will be like, well, you never see people mention Syria. You don't get to say that if you didn't mention Palestine.
Mm,
You don't get to invoke Syrians or Palestinians against each other. That's not how this works. The vast majority of Syrians, of Palestinians, of the Lebanese, they get to talk to each other about it. But you don't
yeah,
get to say it like it's a bit disgusting. I think that's probably one of the more disgusting things I see.
yeah, yeah. No, no, and it's been the case for a while, especially to that after 2015, after Russia got involved in Syria, and so like you had this like
Yes.
much stronger propaganda campaign. Now it's gotten incredibly messy after the fall of Assad.
Yes.
They can't make heads or tails, and like there's just so much conspiracy theories about everything that's happening. Like at this point, there's people who like refuse to call Ahmed Shara by his name because they're like, if you
Yes.
like, that's like a for them, it's almost like if you say
It's
Shara, you must be aligned with him. It's like, no, that's the dude's name. But
yeah. It's just his name. It's
it's
okay.
just his fucking name. Jolani
It's
is
okay.
the yeah. If you say Jolani, you're like kind of
I
glorifying
don't.
him.
Yeah, like it's
Uh,
okay. It's a, like yeah, like whatever.
but either way, it's I've noticed on Blue Sky because I said something about tankies on Blue Sky and I got a lot of shit for it, and I kind of really quickly realized like a lot of people on Blue Sky, there's like a weird new culture and they're talking about tankies in a different way. That's not my understanding of the term at all. But
What is yours?
well, tankies are basically there's another term for it that Elia Ayub actually has been using for the last few years that I like, alt imperialists, right? So it's
Mm,
people who basically think that like West is bad, which yes,
yes.
and therefore we need states to counter that,
Yes.
i.e. Russia or Iran.
Yes.
And and so basically like the cornerstone of it was the Syrian revolution. And so tankies are these people who advocated like who erased the Syrian revolution. And basically
Mm,
it's like yeah, I mean there's another word for it in Arabic in the sort of like Shami discourse of the mumena, right? The kind of axis of resistance. And so these are the tankies when I talk about. You have people who like yeah who are like anti-Israel pro-Assad basically like in a small
yes.
nutshell because they see Assad as anti-Israel even though the dude's never fucking fired a single shot at the Israelis.
Yes.
Um,
He's not even like Saddam Hussein.
no, no, no.
Not even close. People think
No.
they're the same. People think they're the same.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
not.
I mean, fuck them both,
My
but
father
it's
would be
not. Yeah.
upset. My
Oh,
father
really?
would be upset if people. He is still very sad that Saddam is.
It's yeah, and
It's a
this is
common
like
opinion. It's a
it
common.
is. I remember I had my barber who was Syrian. I'm losing my hair, and a part of it is stress. And I'm cutting my hair at the barber, and I ask him about it, and I tell him I'm losing my hair like min al-ham, like from stress and from concerns or whatever. So he like a sort of ma'ammo. He's like, "Give me your hand." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Give me your hand," and I give him my hand. He's like, "Close it." He pokes every finger. He's like, he pulls out my pinky, and he's like, "Fuck all the parties, fuck all the regimes, fuck all the states, fuck all the governments," and then it's this long rant that he's like, they're all corrupt, they're all fucked, they're all whatever. إلا صدام ما في مثله ما في and I'm like dude you're so close.
It's exactly what my father thinks as
Yeah.
well. Exactly.
But
But
anyway,
no, he's not. He's not even close.
no, no,
Assad is
no,
not
the
even close.
dude's it's pure fantasy, but regardless there is this like frustrating anyway, so that was the kind of thing with the tankies and on
Yeah.
Blue Sky, whereas apparently a lot of people on Blue Sky think tankies like they think tankies means communists. So if I say fuck tankies, I'm
This is
saying fuck communists. But it's like, no, I'm
yeah. It's very
it's
common interpretation, but yeah, I think yeah, it's different because when I hear thinking, I also think pro-Israel or anti-Israel pro-Assad, but also like pro the coup belt in the sub-Sahara or like pro like people who think that like China is going to
mm,
any day make Israel submit to like an international order or something. Like that's
yeah.
not going to happen.
These people
You're
don't
being delusional.
understand. Yeah, they don't
No,
understand power. They don't understand
yeah.
whatever. And so it's also like this deep obsession with geopolitics, which is something that I've been very opposed to. It exists, it's important, it needs to be talked about, but like it is an obsession. So like
It's so vague.
it's so vague, but it's so dehumanizing.
Yes, it
And so
is.
it's like
Yes.
basically, I did a comic on the Syrian revolution a few years ago, and the first thing I started with is, do you know live UA maps?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so like for years, that was the main way people understood Syria was just like look at the map, look at the movements, look at the different colors of like there's this group here and there's this group down here. And so what happens there eventually, like again, I used to look at it, it's fine, it's informative. If you look at it too much, if that's the only thing you're looking at and you're not listening to Syrians, you're not looking at analysis on the ground, you're not, and like we do with Gaza, like we constantly center martyrs like Hind Rajab, like Rifat al-Arair, but a lot of those same people did not do that for Syrians and
Yes. This
continue
is true.
to smear. And so a good
Yes.
example though, and now I've been talking about tankies as a kind of anti-Arab, anti like a kind of cult, because these are the same people that were smearing Mahmoud Khalil, the Palestinian activist who was
Yes.
disappeared by ICE. You have people
Yes.
who are advocating for Palestinian, supposedly for Palestinian liberation, who then are smearing a Palestinian activist who was kidnapped by the American empire because he was also working 10 years ago against the Assad regime. And there's
Yes.
like, and so this group is this, yeah, if we get into it, it'll take forever, but like, to me, it's not a footnote. It's not even a distraction. Like my
No.
understandings of the situation are that we desperately, constantly need a serious internationalism that connects these dots, that understands that the struggles for Palestinian liberation, since they're intimately tied, and since it is like the Americans that are doing this, it's not just an Israeli war and genocide in Gaza, it's
No.
an American-Israeli war. Every single bomb that drops
Yes.
in Lebanon is an American bomb. And there's the US approval, and there's US diplomatic support and cover. And and so, I mean, essentially we need like a revolution in the United States, And again, that sounds very idealistic, but like this is where we're at. We cannot rely
Yes.
on states because states act out of their own interest. And so will not support a movement of dispossessed stateless people. And so that's why there's a lot of bullshit coming out of things like Turkey or, yeah, like you said, like China. Like if there's not a buck to be made out of Palestinian liberation, they're not going to do it. Like China, it's very easy for them to come out and say like we support the two-state solution or whatever. We still support the right for Palestinians to resist. It's like, okay, are you going to arm them? No. Like, are you going to stop making
Yes.
deals with the Israelis? Are you going to stop doing this or that? No. Like,
And this is what I like. Oftentimes, comparison is made, and by me, I often make the comparison too. Like, people think that Palestine and South Africa have nothing alike or whatever, right? Like, this is a common rhetorical point in the US. And, put aside that every South African National Congress member says otherwise. So this is
yeah.
an interlinked struggle. Put aside that like Namibia and Mozambique and all the other places also say so and everything. I do think there is one important difference between the two, and that's that there is no Cuba and there is no Soviet Union
Oh, yeah.
for us the way there was for the ANC and for SWAPO and for the MPLA. And this is a serious problem. I think like like liberation. Oh, this is another thing. I think a lot of people on Blue Sky get the impression because as Arabs were, especially in the U.S. now with how things go um, in the current government, we choose how we speak carefully. But a lot of people think that there's like no right to resist whatsoever.
Mm.
Completely incorrect, obviously. Like it's just completely like the right to resist is a fundamental right for us, for everyone who is a colonized people or for a battered people. But the problem for us is that there is no Cuba, there is no Soviet Union type analog, and for also there is no everywhere you look in the region, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Turkish governments, the Saudis, the Emiratis. These are countries that do business with Israel, are U.S. clients in many ways. They get all their weapons from there. You talked about it in a video that I watched a couple of weeks ago. Like, where are they? Where are the Arabs? And the Arabs are in Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Yemen, it looks
Mm.
like. And that's about it. Where's
But
everyone
even
else? I
even
don't
there,
know.
there are power struggles. But yeah,
Yes.
exactly. I think
Like yes, like
just for clarifying, because I think a lot of people actually don't know this, but when you say Cuba and South Africa, the Cubans had sent basically like essentially not mercenaries, but like forces that were like fighting colonial
Yes.
regimes in the greater South Africa region. And that was part of the thing of like, and especially like Southwest Africa. And that's part of the reason why apartheid South Africa fell, but also why some of these regimes were like, there was that's an aspect I think most people don't recognize. I think people think of the end of apartheid in South Africa was like one of like a kind of awakening, just a consciousness where the white settlers were like, "What have we been doing all this time?" Like no, part of it
Yes.
was
Yeah.
resistance, like armed struggle, international armed struggle.
It's everything.
Um,
That's the thing that people really don't get.
yeah.
It's a struggle entails everything. It really does. It entails diplomacy. It entails international courting. It entails fighting.
Yeah.
The Algerians did not. The Algerians did not push out the French by being nice. They did
Or I
it.
mean, slavery did not end, or I
Yes,
mean,
exactly.
codified in the United States.
No.
But I think I do have been thinking a lot about. I haven't read it yet, but the title is very fucking good. One day everyone will be against this. Well, everyone will
Yes,
have
I'm
always
wild.
been against this. Have you
Yes,
read it yet?
I have.
It's
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 good.
good. Yeah.
Yes, undeniably good.
Yeah, the title alone, I think, speaks volumes. And I think a part of it is when we talk about slavery in the United States, or any of these things, any of these like mass historical atrocities, now there's such a moral clarity about them. And so I think there's a revision of how they ended based on that feeling that people realized it was wrong. Or even that
Yes,
the Civil War in the United States, and I don't want to get that much into it because I'm actually not that privy of this history, but that it was like a moral war against like the
yeah,
slavery and the racism of the South. It was not. Slavery was like the cornerstone of it, but Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist. You know what I mean? He wasn't, and even still, there was like the actual abolitionist movement was decades and included so much, and it wasn't just
yes,
this sort of boycotting or this kind of moral reasoning of like, oh wait, because slavery is wrong. Like a lot of it, especially in the North, was like a kind of there's a different economic model that anyway, whatever.
yes. Sure.
Um, and so that's the kind of frustration I feel now, where it's like all of these people who are claiming to be liberals, but also fucking hell, I don't know. I've been so frustrated these days, and I like don't
No,
talk to many people.
no, I also aside from when we talk about these things, I don't. And so, this is our central focus. I When you say liberals, this is and obviously this has been on my mind as you've seen for the last couple of days, Mamdani. What is so revealing about the response to Mamdani's responses? For those who don't who are listening, I think if you don't know, Zohran Mamdani is a Ugandan Indian Muslim running for mayor of New York City. And over the last couple of months, he's been badgered repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly by media to to shift his response about whether or not he believes Israel has a right to exist. We talked about it earlier, and he's gotten more comfortable over time with his answer. And he recently said something like, "I'm not comfortable with supporting any state that has a hierarchy of citizenship." That's a liberal principle. It's not the fundamentally radical principle. But look at the responses he's invoking. People who are saying, well, why doesn't he talk about India? Or he's lying,
Mm,
or something of that sort. Why is it so unbelievable that a Indian Muslim socialist whose family is from Uganda, which is not a place that was very nice to its Indian population after the 1970s. Why is it so unbelievable this guy, the son of a decolonial scholar, and a filmmaker would believe in cosmopolitan principles. Like, why is that so? Like, isn't this what liberals are supposed to believe? Why are they upset? There's
yeah.
something not clicking, is it not? I think it's a little bizarre.
No, yeah. I think there's something a bit frustrating about the English language online because so much of it is dictated by the American discourse,
Yes,
which politically is so twisted. Like having to learn and unlearn, like what a leftist is, even what a liberal is, or what a conservative is.
yes,
Um, it's just because there's nothing like, again, what a libertarian is. Libertarians were a code word for anarchists in the end of the 19th century and early 20th
yeah,
century. Like
yeah,
they weren't able to say they're anarchists, so they said they're libertarians. And then you have fucking, I don't know, like Paul Rand or whatever, I forget his name.
Rand Paul. You look close.
Rand Paul.
Yeah.
I was thinking of I was thinking of Ayn Rand, but
Well, that's why his name is that. That's
yeah.
literally why his name is that.
Wait, is it literally, or are you making a joke?
No, that's literally why his name is Rand Paul. His father, Ron Paul, named him after Ayn Rand.
That's hilarious. I did not know that.
That's actually the reason. Ron Paul read, what is the book called?
Atlas
Atlas
Shrugged.
Shrugged. Yeah,
Yeah,
he read Atlas Shrugged to Rand Paul as a kid.
that's
This
hilarious.
kid this kid was being read it at bedtime.
That's so sad. Poor guy. I mean, fuck him. But
I
regardless,
know, isn't but now you know why he's like that. Well,
but
yeah, no, libertarian, liberal, leftist, like to my understanding, in Europe and in the Middle East and everywhere else, liberal is not the same thing as it is here, libertarian and so
no,
on.
no, yeah. And so I don't know. That's been really frustrating. But you bring up the term cosmopolitan, and then I think that brings us back to Edward Said. Because Edward
Yes,
Said, as a Palestinian uh, Protestant Christian,
yes, he
fluent in
lived it. Yeah,
English, raised in a British school, then lived the rest of his life in America, he describes himself as a cosmopolitan. And I think that to me is something that I use as an identity as well.
I
Because
do too.
as like a queer Arab Druze leftist living now in Vienna, like I don't fit neatly at all into any of these categories. And I think people understand cosmopolitan as as like elitist, or as like a kind of like I'm a New Yorker, as opposed to literally a citizen of the cosmos, right? And like one, I embody whatever. And another term he uses that I really like when asked how he identifies, he says of himself, he feels like he is an energy in motion.
Yes,
And I like that. And also he calls himself an amateur intellectual. And I really
yes,
fucking like that
I do too.
because I haven't studied, out of curiosity, what did you study in university?
I made the awful mistake of becoming a historian.
Oh,
History.
my partner's a historian.
It's great. I don't actually hate it, but it's a pain.
I mean, and then they went into archive studies, which I find very interesting. Um,
I'm considering that.
oh, okay, we can talk. But anyway, so I studied screenwriting, and so like that's
Okay.
informs a lot of my writing. And now with like video essays, it's like, and I
Yes.
do have an interest in cinema.
It makes sense why you're good at it.
Oh, thank you. I literally write scripts like when I'm doing my video
Yes.
essays. And also again, Edward Said was such a big figure for me as well because he's very theatrical,
Yes.
and he's got
He's
a
a bit
fashion.
he's a bit what's the word? Sassy? Sassy? I don't know.
He has a sassiness. He has a certain way, um,
Diva?
a
I think of the
flair for
diva.
the dramatic,
Yeah.
let's say. And so I like that too. And even in the ways he speaks and whatever. But so I don't know. I think I want to slowly wrap up there, only
Sure.
because again, I was really happy here to talk with you and get to know you a bit better. I've been reading your stuff for a while, and there's just a kind of sense like, you know what I mean? It's through tweets, but like I can read into it a bit. And we do come from very different kind of positionalities and like raised in different places, but there's sort of meeting points. And I could
Yeah,
very
of
easily tell that Edward
course.
Said is one of them.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I the last anecdote I'll raise is that I remember I ran across somebody recently who is just now reading Culture and Imperialism for the first time. And whenever I think about the book, and I read it last year, I have to think of his BBC Arena documentary
Yep.
about Empire that he has I think it was in promotion of the book as well. It obviously incorporates the book a lot. And I remember there's one section towards the end where he like has all these TVs in the back and they're blaring and then it cuts to him full, just straight up in his face, and he looks like the most disheveled, like non. He hasn't slept, and he's about
Yeah.
to, and he opens up the book and he reads to you from front to on, and it's absurd and it's
Yeah.
goofy, but also it's captivating. He does a good job making you care about this actual anti-imperialist camp, making you care about the words that animated
Yeah.
Algerians and animate us today. It's good.
Yeah, and honestly, I try to embody that same energy in these video essays, like trying to, I mean, it's not like make these ideas sexy, but like a bit more accessible.
I
Like
think you do. I seriously think you do. And I told you beforehand before we recorded, but I I watched your stuff and then I you found me on Blue Sky and I found you. That was such a I think that's a cool moment. One of the cool things about the internet, in my opinion.
yeah, one of the few at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, I use that series in the video essay, the Arena series, especially like the clips on colonialism. And I do
Yes.
remember, because I don't know how much artistic agency he had, but there are some scenes, especially of like when he's talking about Joseph Conrad and he's talking about Heart of Darkness. There's like a really weird sequence in that documentary with like the, I don't know, the African masks, the music, and the kind of like
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
I I have that on my phone somewhere. I clipped the stuff and I
Oh,
have it
really?
somewhere. I know exactly what you're talking about. But
Um,
yes. There's no way that he chose that. I don't know if he did. It had to be like maybe something that BBC was like, this would be awesome.
yeah,
Here's some
yeah.
vague music.
When I was in Lebanon last year, I actually am planning on doing a video essay entitled "Who's Afraid of Edward Said,"
Oh,
which will be a kind of retrospective. And I'm going to try not to be too much because there are critiques, and I think it is very important to like hold space for like
sure.
some of these things. But I went to see his gravesite. You
Oh,
know, he's buried in Lebanon
yeah.
in a graveyard owned by the Quakers.
Okay. Wow. I
Yeah,
didn't know it was owned by the Quakers. I knew he was buried in like,
yeah. Yeah, by the Quakers, because his wife, I think, or his wife's family were Quakers.
yeah. I think so. I've it's been a while since I've read his book. His wife is still she
Yeah.
still runs the what is it called? The symphony? The orchestra?
Oh, does she? The
Yes,
piece
she
or
still
the
runs.
something?
Yes. She still manages that orchestra, I think,
Oh,
in New
interesting.
York. It's funny.
And his kid really grew up to look like him, like like a hottie.
Yes.
Um, I don't know if you've seen like younger photos of Edward Said with like wood.
Yeah. That's the other thing. See, listen, like people can criticize Edward all day, every day. But listen, there's something undeniable about there's this comedian in New York, this Subway Kareem. I don't know if you've ever seen hot takes on the subway.
Oh
Muslim
yeah,
guy. I think he's Egyptian.
he is a different. Yeah,
Yeah, he said a couple of days ago, a lot of Arabs are ugly from 15 years old to 30 years old. But then 30 years old,
Oof.
immediately immediately become the hottest person in the room.
You tap
And
that
that's,
daddy energy.
yeah,
You start hitting that. Yeah.
you get that gray, a little salt and pepper in
Mm.
there, and then your hair starts looking a little fucked up,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, I can see why you're an AMLO. I can see why you talk about the CIA paying a bunch of governments off. I can get it.
Mm.
The little white lawn chair, the cigarette.
We Arabs, and this is going to be the last thing I say, and this could be like a segue, like for the next time we have another conversation. But we Arabs have a huge daddy complex.
Yes.
Like Abdel Nasser is the daddy of like the whole fucking region, and no one wants to talk about it. But this is my like queer intervention to like the kind of discourse.
A video essay about the queer image of Nasser.
Yeah,
I think
who's your
that'd be
daddy?
fun.
It would
Yes.
be
Oh, that'd be
fun.
good.
That would be my coming out video where it's like, hello, hello, we're gonna talk
Surprise.
about daddy.
Surprise. Are you a daddy like Nasser? Are you a zaddy like I don't even know who would be a zaddy.
What's a
I don't
zaddy?
who I have no idea. I just heard it. You
Oh,
know who Pedro Pascal is?
yeah.
He claims he's a zaddy.
Oh, I have
I don't
no
know
idea
what
what
that
that
is.
means. Is that
Maybe it's
Gen
a
Z
zest.
daddy?
Maybe I think maybe it's zesty daddy. I don't know.
Is that
I don't. That's probably not true. I made that up.
okay, yeah, Leila. I really enjoyed this conversation, and
I
I'm really
did too.
glad to
Thank you
have
for
met
having me.
you.
Yes.
And yeah, we'll probably, I mean, I don't know, have you on, if not on this podcast, on something else, on FTP or TFTT or something. We'll talk about
I
it.
would love to be with you again. Thank you.
For those listening, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting this podcast in the two main ways. become a member of the Patreon, a monthly member, or you can give me a one-time donation in my Ko-fi and my tip jar. Again, both links will be in the description. If you don't want to or you can't support financially, you can still help me with this podcast by leaving a review or a rating, like and subscribe if you're on YouTube to help us with the algorithm. Or you can help us with the organic algorithm of society by telling your friends and family about us, to help us spread the word. So with that said, Leila, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you all next time.